What is going on, everyone? Tis Miyanovich, and I welcome you to the main dojo, the place where we process the raw struggles of men in an unprecedented paradigm. There is something inside of you that wants you to be more than what you are. But there also may be something inside of you that wants you to go down. And for some of us, that means going down for good. So, remove your ego, drop your bullshit, become vulnerable, and step into the dojo, mate. One of the things I wanted to see if you'd be up for this today, because I know about this from us talking and from David, including you in his book a little bit, David Yamani.
Yeah.
Is one of the things that we talk about on this podcast is shitty dads or mediocre dads or something like that when your dad wasn't quite perfect in life. Is that something you would want to talk about here?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Fuck, I'll talk about anything.
Okay. So what was your relationship like? Or what happened with your biological father? What was your relationship like? And I don't even know if he's still with us. What would it be like today?
No, he passed away years ago. So I have there's a whole interesting story with my biological father. One that it's kind of almost unbelievable when you hear it, like it reads like a movie. My mother, who grew up in the Jersey Shore, was my father's side chick. My father used to own a lot of nightclubs. He was like the nightclub king in New Jersey and a bunch in Florida. And she was like a bartender at one of his bars. And basically, you know, he had double life. You know, he had his wife and kids, and then he had my mother. And, you know, he also was like the manager for Chuck Webner. The boxing legend. Okay. I remember the first time I watched the 30 on 30 about Rocky. Chuck Webner was the boxer that they made Rocky about. Stallone used that story, and basically Muhammad Ali was Apollo Creed, right? Giving a guy a chance. So, you know, my father and my mother, they just couldn't make it work, right? Like my mom wasn't going to be side chick the rest of her life, and my dad was a pretty powerful guy. And my family and him, it was like the Hatfield and McCoys. Like they just, you know, when it got bad, it got bad. And, you know, my mother was, she's a tough lady, and my father was a tough man, and neither of them wanted to lose. And I feel like I was kind of like that pawn that was caught in the middle. You know what I mean? It was the ego over everything, I think, for those guys, or for my mom and him. My mother ended up basically kidnapping me, when I was a kid, because the courts, he had bought a judge, and, basically the judge, my mom was a waitress, you know, a bartender, and 19 years old, and basically told by the courts, like, you have to hand over your kid to this man and pay him child support. And they had two options at that point. And, you know, one was to do it and try to battle through the legal system. My dad had all the money in the world, and my mother, you know, my family didn't. You know, they were good, but they didn't have that type of money. And, you know, ended up fleeing the country when I was young. Fake passports, fake identities, went to Spain, moved around the world actually, and then eventually landed back in the United States, and just never had a really didn't have a relationship with my father in terms of, like, you know, I think it's funny because you look back on all this stuff when you're older, right? And I remember when my father passed, my mom came over and she like put a box on a table, and she was like, "You need to read all this." And I let the box sit there for like 2 weeks. And I remember my wife was like, "Do you mind if I look at it?" And I was like, "No, go ahead." And she was going through the box, and it was all the court documents and stuff like that. And my wife's like, "Why didn't your mom give this to you while he was alive?" And she's like, you need to read this. Right. And, I read it, and it's just one of those things where I think, the good side kept me, you know what I mean? Like my family was great to me. My mother was great to me, but I don't know if it was the right thing to do. I don't know. Like, I think my mom and my family, knowing them now, probably poisoned me as a kid, because, I found out things later about my father that, from my sisters. I have half sisters that didn't know I existed, until one day he tells them in a drunken stupor. I don't know what he was thinking. But, my sisters had told me, they're like, yeah, he'd come to pick you up and take you to the park, and you wouldn't stop crying for 4 hours. You were afraid of him. And he was just like, and now me being older with my own daughters and like going through a horrible, divorce, I look back at my father, and one of my biggest regrets in life was, when I went to Ocean Township High School in New Jersey and started playing football, and, I was in the paper, he wanted to reach out to me to talk and tell his side of the story. And at the time I didn't, I just told my sisters, I was like, look, I'm going to leave well enough alone. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to insult a side that has backed me. I don't want anyone to get a misunderstanding. We haven't talked in this X amount of time. What difference does it make now? One of my biggest regrets is not talking to my father, to give him the opportunity to at least share his side of the story.
Yeah. Did you ever get letters or anything like that from him?
I mean, he didn't even know how to find us. We went to Spain. You got to understand, this powerful people, right?
Was your dad connected?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And my family on my mother's side has connections. And this was one of those situations where it was like, we're going to stay out of it and let you two knuckleheads, no one's getting involved in this. Like, so when we fled, it's funny because a lot of the information that I found out about my father, later on in life, because it was really interesting getting the other perspective, right? There's three sides to every story. There's side A, side B, and then there's the truth somewhere in the middle, right? And my sisters, when I developed a relationship with them, they were like, your mother is the only person who beat our father. And I was like, what do you mean beat? And they're like, you couldn't beat her. Like she got away with you, and you guys fled wherever you went, and they couldn't find you. And he had people looking for you. Like, you know what I mean? So it's a crazy story. And if we were to go through the whole story, we'd need about like 2 hours. Cause when I was telling Yamani this story, he did his research. He looked up a lot of things, but it was crazy. It's crazy to think about just the timeline and, looking back at things now. And I'm glad I got to document it with the Yamani book.
Yeah.
So
yeah. You can always tell with you that there's I knew a little bit, enough, like just from talking to you. But you could tell there was a depth there. And, I can relate. And I think a lot of people who don't have super crazy backstories or super crazy family bullshit, they just can't fathom, right? Or they can't relate. But I have one of those super fucking crazy things too. And what's interesting about you to me is the same thing that I find interesting about myself. Like when the backstory is super fucked up and the person ends up not being super fucked up. The person ends up being a really good person who doesn't reflect what happened. Right. I'm not saying that like in your case, your mother's side weren't good people. Right. And obviously that they were, and it rubbed off on you. But even having one side of the family that's good, if your start in life is you've got two families that are connected and there's to crime and bullshit and God knows what, and that's where you came from. Right. And you were born in that situation. And then you end up being Michael Sodini the way you are right now. That very easily could not have happened. Right. You very easily could have been a nightmare and a mess from that. Right. and you aren't. You're like the opposite of that beginning. To me, you are.
Right.
And I think I'm guessing that's accurate. You're a really good human with a giant heart, and you're very fair. And you're the last person I would expect to be around criminal shit. Right? You're the complete opposite. And I have the same thing, which is, both. I started off the first episode of this podcast talking to, our first guest, who I give a anonymous avatar name to, because some people that are going to talk with us don't want people to know their real name because they don't want their wife hearing or their boss hearing or something. So his nickname is Half Deadpool because he's the person that's in trouble, like testosterone and all these problems are happening to him. And he's always like, dude, I'm like fucking half dead. I'm like fucking half dead. So I call him Half Deadpool. And in the first episode with him, I say, my family's basically both sides. They're basically fucking retarded. Like I mean that. My mom's side of the family, I love them and they have really big hearts and they're very helpful. But they're basically both sides are retards. Like they really have something,
Right.
like it's almost like, we would start the example like this. Start imagining, God, I'm going to get trashed for this. I don't like calling people with Down syndrome retards. I like calling people that are idiots who shouldn't be idiots retards.
Listen, I get it.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So if both sides of my family had Down syndrome and I'm like this, that should start to indicate to you the gap between where I came from and what I am. Right. Or the other one is if both sides of my family were midgets and I'm 6'4", which I am, what would that be like? Think about the discrepancy between what dwarves need and what I need.
Mm-hmm.
That's my background. Is these people they are missing shit, man. Like they're missing it. Like it's not in their brain wiring at all. They're not going to gain it. They can't gain it. It's not there. And so they don't do really well in this world because they don't quite have Down syndrome. Right. But it's kind of close. Like it's kind of close to this. And some of them are like, I don't know, would there be such a thing as somebody with Down syndrome who has 180 IQ? It kind of like morphs into this weird place where they're like, some of them are brilliant and retarded at the same time. So my background, I can relate to that start because it's like you started from this crazy fucking place with two families that were connected and there's this chase around the world and you end up like this. You end up being you. And I see a giant gap. So I guess my question would be, can you entirely explain it through your mom's side of the family being good? Or do you think there's just something about you inherently that's different from everybody?
You know what? Like one thing I had to recognize about myself is I definitely avoid drama. And sometimes I'm naive. Like I don't realize something may be going as bad as it should be. You know what I mean?
Like your like your friendship with Rob. So
you're right. I'm still in it. I'm like battered wife with him. I'm like, he promises not to hit me in the face anymore, only in the calf. And he's going to work on that too. Like I can't leave him. No, fucking Rob. But no. So growing up, I remember like listening to my mother cry, right? Because, my mom is emotional and she like wears it on her sleeve and she was a single mom and like we were broke. And, when you choose to flee, and cut off like all ties with your family and kind of become that single working mom, like, I'm sure there was a lot of rough nights and a lot of scary times. And I just remember like listening to her cry and thinking, I don't want to make her cry.
Yeah.
And almost like it kept me on a straight path. Like where my friends, I remember, you know, when I was little, they were like stealing car stereos and stuff like that. And I was just like, I'm out.
Yeah.
And it was simply because it's like, I don't need to bring any more drama to my mother, you know? So I don't know. Now, some people might say, well, that's a horrible way to live. Like you're living to, like, you know, not disappoint somebody, but it kept me straight. It kept me good, you know, because I was worried about her. So I don't like drama. I don't like fighting. It's not that I won't bring it if you bring it, right. You know, I'm insanely defensive. But I just never have been the type of person. I've always had empathy and, you know, I'm the guy that gets upset in the movies when the dog dies or, you know, things like that. And, you know, I've always been able to understand how fortunate I was. So I'll give you like this example. Like I have these memories as a kid. Like I remember one time, we were living in Chicago is when we first fled and my dad found her and he showed up to Chicago with some police officers. And, like it's weird when you grow up. And once again, like this doesn't seem, I'm really good at reframing things too. Like, you know, when I think about other people's problems, I'm really, really good at that. Right. But like, I just remember like my mother being like, you gotta go. You're going to go with Lee, was her boyfriend, you know, and she knew she only had a certain amount of time because she got tipped off. And we think that his wife tipped off my grandmother that he was coming to get me. Cause I think she didn't want anything to do with this. And, you know, being a kid, it's like moving out of you know, you think about like the people that have to move out of their house into fire right now, right? They have a certain amount of time and they have to figure out what they want to take, right? Passports, whatever, you know, birth certificates, like things like that. But you can't take everything. And for me as a kid, I remember being like, what do you mean all my toys? Like, you know, it's shit that's like replaceable. But at the time when you're young, you look at everything as like your value and just having to run, right? And not really knowing what the enemy was. You know what I mean? Like, what are we going to die? Are we like, why are we running? You know what I mean? Like, why are the police after you? Like little things like that, you know, but you know, for me, it was always being able to just worry about her. I worried about her more than I worried about anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that helped shape me to who I am today. It helped me listen to people and be like, look, that's their reality. And, you know, even if you eye roll, sometimes you just got to be like, you got to accept it. I'm pretty good at staying calm and keeping people calm. I'm good at that. Like, I know that's a skill I have for sure. I mean, my wife has told me, she's like, you have a very calm aura about you. Like, you know, to be able to bring people down. But I don't know. I don't even remember what the question was.
No, the question was, well, we were talking about what do you think contributes to you coming from such a really fucked up beginning? And, you know, the phrase is, you know, the apple falls far from the tree. Well, right. You fell from the tree and rolled 8 billion miles.
Okay. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So is it?
Yeah. No. So I think it was a combination of all the things that were happening to me and still being able to persevere through it or not worry about it. Like, you know, going to 4 high schools or like, man, like going to so many different elementary schools, moving around and being all over the world. I think that helped too.
Sure.
Because I got exposed to so much culture and things that, you know, when we lived in Spain, I didn't even speak Spanish. I was a little kid. You know what I mean? I think all those things helped, right? Because as much as like, you know, I would have loved to have grown up in the same neighborhood with the same people and played on the same sports teams all the way up through high school to get that type of recognition. Bouncing around gave me an appreciation. You know, some people that I met when I was younger, like kids, they'd never been out of the town they grew up in. You know what I mean? I've been like all over the world. I think all those things helped shape who I am today.
You're lucky that you're a stud, dude, because if you were fucking ugly, you would have been eating shit sandwiches every time you fucking moved to a new school. It would have been fucking horrible.
Here's the one thing that this is another thing that I always had in me. Like when I would go to a new school, I always felt like, you know, I'm the new guy. So it's just like, there's always excitement around the new person or people like there's somebody new here. Right. And, you know, people would get all salty, you know, when I'd show up. And I remember just like looking for bullies. Like I was just like, okay, I want to pick on bullies. I know it sounds good, right? But like when I saw somebody that like thought they were intellectually better than somebody or making fun of somebody that was weaker, I always came to that person's defense, whether they liked it or not. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's so apparent in your personality still.
Yeah, I don't know what that is, but I had it since I was little. You know what I mean? Like I hated it. I hated it when I saw people get picked on. I hated it when I saw people get bullied. I hated it. And I was just like, okay, you know, I always came in, I was an athlete and I was just like, I'm going to pick on that guy.
Yeah.
Like I never, even with the football team, I never wore like my Letterman jacket. Yeah. Cause it felt like Cobra Kai. You know what I mean?
I think a lot of this is you were born with a lot of this shit. There's something about just how the genetic reality tumbled inside of you that you have this stuff, and who knows what side of the family it came from. Or sometimes with the genetic reality, maybe it comes from 4 generations ago inside of us. They're like, I can't remember, I heard recently, they're like 200 different inputs into personality just from birth. And a lot of it has to do with what came from behind. So, are your half sisters nice, kind people? And
oh, 100%. Yeah. That was a really funny story. I'll tell you. So they did not know about me, and one was in high school and one was out of high school. And I was like 22. Yeah, I think it was 22 at the time. And this is the height. This is when I was modeling, you know, and my father decides one night, cause he owned a bunch of bars and he's drinking with his oldest daughter, Tara. And, he decides to tell my sister that they have a brother, you know, and, tells her this story over alcohol at 3 a.m. and she starts to cry, and he sees that it's a bad reaction. So he's like, no, I'm just playing. I'm joking. And she's like, give me his fucking name. Like, give me a name.
Nice.
And, he ends up like giving her the name. She gets the phone book, and basically picks the one Sodini in the phone book that would take her call and talk to her at 3 a.m. Nonetheless, like, right. So I remember I was with my friend. He was visiting from Italy. We went to college together, and, we were out the night before, and I wake up to this message from, you know, my aunt, who's like, hey, your sister called last night. You know, your half sister called last night. And then a message from my sister who called my cell phone, right? Hey, Mike, this is Tara. I'm your sister. Da, 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 da. I remember the first thing out of my friend's mouth, my Italian friend, Matteo, he goes, she couldn't have waited like 4 more hours for decent time. Like, he 22 years. And then, like, you know, like, I love the funny logic of it. Cause I was like, yeah, it is kind of funny. Like, I need to know now. Right? But so the first time I met them, and this is really the dumbest story on the planet, but it is super funny. So, I ended up calling her back and we're talking. And I remember like, she made me feel like shit because she's like, you've known about me and you never tried to contact me? Cause I was like, yeah, I've known about you and your sister. And I felt so bad, but I was like, you don't understand. My allegiance is to this side. You know what I mean? So I wasn't mixing. I was told not to mix, like, do not get involved with these people. Like, to me, you know, your father was the villain. He was Darth Vader to the Luke Skywalker. And, so they want to meet me. And, you know, I'm struggling with that because I don't really know them, but I know they're upset. So I go and I talk to my idiot uncle at the time. My uncle is the greatest. He was the most funny guy on the planet, but, you know, and he was a tough guy. And I said, listen, they found me and they want to meet. And I don't feel like they should be held responsible for anything that this drama of this family, you know, these two families. So he goes, all right, here's what you're going to do, because I think this is a setup. Now keep in mind, this is fucking not a setup, right? But he goes, you tell him to meet you at this diner. And he goes, you pull up, you tell him to get in a car and you take them to another diner. Right. And I'm buying into this shit because I'm like, I don't know what's going to happen to me. Like, what is this a setup? So when I meet them, and keep in mind, like, I had such anxiety about this meeting, and then they were supposed to call me before I was going to meet them at this diner. And at the time they were late. And so I thought they were canceling on me. So my girlfriend at the time and I just got super fucking high. Cause I was like, like I'm going to meet them. I need to smoke. I smoked myself stupid, like to the point of where I probably shouldn't have driven down there. Right. So we pull up. I tell them, get in the car. We go to another diner. They're just young kids. Mm-hmm. Like, one's in high school. The other one's like, I think like 19 or 20, like almost my age. And I'm high as a kite. So we get to this other diner and they want to ask me 50 million questions. And I'm like, fucking the walls are moving, right? Like I smoked my brain away.
Right.
Like, so, they're asking about the modeling, and my older sister goes, have you ever been on E? Well, I take that as she's asking me if I do ecstasy. So I go, yeah, I fucking love E. We do it all the time. She was asking if I was on E television. Yeah, right. The younger one starts to cry and gets up and runs away. And my other sister is like, I'll be right back, and chases her. So I look at my girlfriend and I'm like, what did I say? And my girlfriend's like, I have no idea. She asked if you were on E. They come back and she's like, look, I'm sorry, but my older sister had a really bad drug problem. And when you said that, it just, I started thinking like, are we all druggies?
Right.
She was talking about E television. The older one's like, I meant like E television. And I'm like, fuck, I'm an idiot. I'm a fucking idiot. So that was the first time I met them in person. Right. And that was the way that I came through the door. But they were beautiful. I still have a relationship with them in terms of like, we follow each other on Facebook. My younger sisters come and stay with me, and it was great developing that relationship. It was really hard though, cause like, I remember like when my father passed, I remember like my sister called me. She's like, Dad passed. And I'm like, no, I talked to Dad earlier today. It was my stepfather. It was like my real father, right. At the time. But it's hard because when someone meets you and they have this connection with you and you're like, I don't even know you.
Yeah.
I don't know you.
Yeah. It's, you guys have a friendly connection, but you're not like, it wasn't like you met and you're like, now we're brother and sister. And
no, I can't force that type of relationship. Yeah. But I mean, I think we're good. Like if they called and said, hey, I'm in Vegas, do you want to hang out? Of course I'm going to hang out, you know.
But they're good kids. They're good people.
Yeah.
They're not people. Like messed up children of mafiosos, like getting a credit card and fucking decorating people's houses with leopard print blankets and shag carpet.
No, like they're all family people. They have kids and, looking back at it, it's kind of like, man, my life would have taken such a different turn if I had him in my life, and it could have been fun, right? Like, sure. Nightclubs and bars, and, at that time I was young and crazy, and, my older sister, she managed a lot of his places. You always think of like, what if it's that Y in the road, but, you can't really look back at things and,
with him,
it could have been worse.
Yeah. He chased you around with vigor. Do you think that was love or power? You talked about like the whole fight between your mom being somebody who gets what she wants and power, and your biological father is the same way. Do you think he was chasing you because he loved you, or because it was like, no, I'm going to win? Were you like a pawn? Was it half love and half you were a pawn? Like, have you thought about that?
Well, if you listen to my side of the family, he did not love me and he just wanted to hurt my mom. I don't believe that's true. I think there's both, right? Yeah. I mean, as somebody who went through an awful divorce, my divorce from my first wife, we had 2 kids. I couldn't stand her, I couldn't, but I wanted my kids.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to lie and say that there wasn't a part of me that was like, fuck her. You know what I mean? Like, it's so, I think they let their fight just get to an extreme. I mean, the things that my, the box, I talk about the box that was dropped off.
Yeah.
I read that, I was reading through some of the court cases. My mom did some foul shit. Like, she showed up at his restaurant bar one time and just started throwing bottles into the wall. And I'm like, how did he not kill you?
Right. Right.
You clearly weren't the most sane person,
Yeah.
right? So now I can't take you serious when I'm reading some of these things and I'm like, that behavior, like whether you want to do it or not,
Right.
you know what I mean? It's I don't know. Once again, I said, like, I have my two biggest regrets in life, are spending a lot of energy on women that were never going to be there in the end anyways. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, I can't get that time back and that sorrow and that pain. And it's like, it was all for nothing. I mean, it's building blocks and you learn. And then my second biggest regret was not giving my father the opportunity to talk to me when I was older.
Yeah.
Just leaving well enough alone. I shouldn't have done that. I should have at least given him the opportunity to say, cause maybe he would have said, I did love you. That's why I chased you.
Yeah. He, when did he pass?
He passed, God, I want to say like 2000, somewhere around like 2007 or 2000. Yeah. No, a little later than that. Yeah. I think he passed around 2008 or 2007, 2008, somewhere in there. He wasn't my father. You know what I mean? So it just, I don't have a connection to him.
Sure.
So when he passed, I didn't even feel anything. Yeah. There were times when I was playing my father was so well known in the Jersey Shore. There were times when I was playing basketball with friends that didn't know I was his son and his name got brought up. Like, people were talking about the old days and the good old days. And then, like, Bill Strominger, who was the president of my company. Yeah. Who took his own life with a firearm, right? One of the driving forces behind WTTA. When he came on board at Eagle, which is the company that my family owned, it was great because he worked for my father as a bouncer for years, like during the heyday. So it was really cool to kind of get cause he liked my father. My uncle, who was a bouncer for him, did not like my father. But getting Bill's version of the story helped me kind of shape the man he was. He's like, your father was the most generous guy on the planet. Like, everybody loved your dad, So it was like getting that other perspective.
Yeah. It wasn't as simple as good guy, bad guy.
No, definitely not. That's a lot to unpack. I mean, there's a lot of questions. Like I said, is a whole podcast in itself about just like that journey was insane. But crazy stories.
A lot of people couldn't relate to when your biological father isn't your father. I can relate to that because it's about investment. There are throughout history, there is a large percentage of people that were created by men who didn't end up being the father or the person that invested. It's a pretty regular occurrence on planet Earth for humans. It's not that rare, but I have the same thing. An attempted relationship for years there in the early days, but they're so fucking dysfunctional, that side of the family, that by the time I was 17, 16, I had to walk away. There was no question about there was no question about it. They were fucked. And if you're around them, you're fucked too. Mm-hmm. There's no hey, let's work this out. And their love, it was really fucking fucked up. Like, really fucked up. So for me, it's different, but I can relate to the whole, this person is the person that made me, but not my father. My stepfather wasn't really a father either. He was more like a competing sibling, in terms of my mom's attention. My stepfather worked his shit out. He's a fantastic grandfather and a very funny person, but very stunted human. Whenever I was in the realm of potentially needing a father, he wasn't really. So, I sort of had a father myself, but I can relate to the whole, my biological father wasn't a father, right? It means actions. So your relationship with your stepdad is good, right? He was there?
My stepfather came into my life when I was 11.
Okay.
So, I was a latchkey kid. Remember that term?
Yeah, of course.
Of course. Yeah. So did a lot of raising myself. But my stepfather, obviously because of the way that I was protective over my mother, I gave him a really hard time. But it wasn't until I was in college, then I fell in love with the man.
Yeah.
Cause I was able to grow and look back and be like, damn, my fucking stepfather was a good dude.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like he's just a good dude.
Yeah.
So we still have we still have a great relationship today.
Right. Is your mom and your stepfather, did they divorce or are they still together?
They're divorced. And, I mean, they're cool.
Yeah.
That was a weird thing watching them get divorced I'm an adult while I'm watching them get divorced. He's feeling bad. And I'm like, bro, go be happy.
Yeah, right.
Like, I love my mother, but Jesus,
Yeah.
I'd kill my mom if I was married to her.
You get it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. So like I said, it's interesting to watch like these impacts. A lot of males or men that have a substandard situation with their biological father growing up, they just get fucked over by it for years, and some people never recover from it. You don't seem to have had that. I mean, challenges, yes, from it, but it doesn't seem to have any heavy impact on you other than your regret, like to not be able to give him a chance to fucking explain his side.
No, I don't. I was happy growing up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like there were times, I will say this, and not to like cue this sad music, which, would be funny if you did this right now. But, yeah, right, the violin. But there were times when like, playing football and basketball and things like that, like, watching the other kids with their dads, and there's a part of me that was kind of like, I wish I had my father here to like lean on coaches and things like that. You know what I mean? Like it gave me like a chip on my shoulder though, because like everybody that had like that really good dad that was like talking to the coach and the kids play, I'm lighting that kid up in practice. Like, you know what I mean?
Fuck you and your good dad.
Yeah. Fuck you and your fucking family unit. Your politician who's, politicking for you to get that starting safety position that fucking I want.
Yeah. I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, and sports is like a church, right? It's a mecca for high school football and basketball, baseball. So many big players came out of that area. Joe Montana, Dan Marino, like fuck. If you didn't have a dad, you kind of didn't have a prayer unless you were like, really naturally gifted, because at some point, once you're past little league, like midget football, once you get to like 13, you got to have somebody there working you with skills. Like otherwise you're just going to get left behind. And I lucked out in that my stepdad worked in the athletic department of a prestigious prep school. And, that's where I ended up going to school and just being around it enough. He would like work on shit with me here and there a little bit, but he wasn't really like a step into it guy, really work skills and drills with me. He wasn't that way. He would just I had this 142 acre campus with a giant athletic facility that he has the keys for the entire thing. And I am there constantly. That's where I grew up, not in my neighborhood, although I did play around the neighborhood, but I grew up on that campus at that athletic complex. And I had giant gymnasiums, weight room, swimming pool, fucking fields, track, every ball. He was in charge he was equipment and field manager. So He lined all the fields. He purchased all the equipment. He purchased all the uniforms. He washed all the uniforms. He was like the pillar of that athletic community. He worked there for 49 years. And, that's where I grew up. So there was enough of it for me to get osmosis, going, and I could hang at a private school. But my friends from the neighborhood who played in public school, who had dads that were super into fucking sports, because that's what happens in Pittsburgh because of the Steelers and the Pirates and the Penguins. And these dudes could just light me up. You know what I mean? With most things. But in the private school, I could get away with, having pretty decent ability, mediocre ability. But if you didn't have a dad and you were in the public school realm, you get fucking crushed. Because from 13 years old, they're like working on ball
Oh, yeah.
6-7 days a week.
Right. You're out in the front yard. See, I didn't have that. I didn't, my mother wasn't an athlete, you know, so she's not going to sit there and be like, hey, let's go get your mitt.
Right.
Like, you know, or, you know, let me look at your running stance, or, you know what I mean? Like, you know, you become almost more like a raw talent, and, you know, you get coached when you're at practice, but, you know, you don't have that. It doesn't continue, you know. I always look at a lot of coaches, you know, growing up, they would coach their kid. And it was cool is like when my daughter started playing soccer, I know nothing about soccer, but like I ended up becoming the soccer coach, and it was kind of fun to have that bond, you know, to be able to do that with her. You know, it was really something that meant something to me. And I'm like, kid's not appreciating it now, but one day she's going to look back and be like, yeah, my dad coached our soccer team for 2 years. You know what I mean? That was just a way for me to spend time with her.
Yeah. I was good enough to hang and help and play with my neighborhood best friend from T-ball, you know, up through high school. And I slept over his house all the time. He slept over my house all the time. He had a basketball court in his yard. We were constantly playing sports in the neighborhood when I wasn't out at the private school like that. And he ended up playing professional baseball for the Royals and the Indians.
Wow.
And so I was good enough to help him get better. But when you show up so when I was 12, you know, like from 9 years old until 12, so 9, 10, 11, 12, 4 years. In summer baseball, I was always on the all-star team, always on a traveling team. But when I was 13, I'd started developing knee pain. I went through growth spurts and my knees fucking hurt all the time. So I took a year off of baseball. And when I came back to Pony League, which is 14 years old, and these dudes have been for well over a year growing and working with their dads. And you step up to the plate. And interestingly, this is what happened. The first game of the season, I'm playing against my best buddy from the neighborhood. I haven't faced him since Little League, so I don't know what's going on with him. And he's a star pitcher at the public school. First pitch, he throws me a nasty fucking curveball, like a 14-year-old kid with a giant hook. And I didn't even know he could throw it because we hadn't been doing that for a year. So I stepped up to the plate and he threw the nastiest fucking curveball at 14. And I felt like I was going to cry. I was like, how on earth am I supposed to handle that? I ended up being able to like shank one off into right field as a single. Right. Like he threw a fastball and on the outside and I shanked it. Like I just kind of like flicked it out into right field. And it was kind of a weak ass single. And I got to first base and I looked at him and he just shook his head like, that was the weakest ass hit you've ever had off of me. And fucking bullshit. It's bullshit. But that 1 year gap and these dudes are throwing curveballs and sinkers and I don't have somebody helping me to do that. I was able to, and again, because I went to private school, I was able to like figure it out, get in the batting cage extra, that kind of shit. But there's no comparison to when somebody has a dad and it's sports. Mm-hmm. There's no comparison. I mean, it's not to say, I'm not even mentioning that most of those dads were fucking abusive and fucked those kids up. And those kids ended up having mental problems later in life because their dad was like
on top of them all the time.
And they weren't allowed to do anything else and all that shit.
Yeah.